With that, let us bring in former chief of police at Southern Connecticut State University, Joe Dooley. He's on my right, and former Rhode Island Advisory Commission member for Emergency Management, Jeff Kelly, on the left. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. And what I think is so valuable about your insight this morning, we have had a number of security law enforcement experts on the program, on the channel, over the course of the last 24 hours and all week long, in fact. But your focus is on hardening institutions, be it schools, hospitals, whatever, to make sure that if something like this is about to happen, that it doesn't, or if it does, we find the suspect immediately. And Joe, I'm going to start with you. What stands out to me, the fact that the thing that blew this case wide open was a random homeless guy who provided the necessary connections and information to tie all this together, speaks volumes to me about the lack of proper cameras, security, you name it, on the campus of Brown. Joe.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It was an incredible job that they did in finally bringing this to a conclusion. But information at the beginning of this incident, as it's unfolding, is absolutely critical. Having the information to the, hundreds of law enforcement were there Saturday night in Providence, and it can be very chaotic without information. Having the information at hand, the videos, the radio communications, and interoperability is so critical.
Jeff, the president of Brown University, Christina Paxson, shockingly said during a press conference yesterday, when all this started going down, quote, "I don't think a lack of cameras in that building had anything to do with what happened." To me, that statement is completely incongruous. So to you, I ask, what do all schools, whether you're a kindergarten, a preschool, or a college and university, need to do to make sure they harden their targets starting yesterday?
Well, I mean, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and the timeliness of it is critical. By being able to share immediate video out to agency or agencies, multiple agencies, within 5 to 10 seconds, which is what MutualLink provides, that gives them a live picture of what transpired.
And to be clear, you work for a company named MutualLink who provides these very services. I want to be completely clear about that. Let's go back to the the Attorney General for Massachusetts, on the difficulty of tracking the suspect through his phone. I want you to listen to this.
So he was using an application on his phone, and there have been a couple of things. The Google phone doesn't allow officers to ping the direct location and get real-time location information about the phone. There was also beliefs that he was using SIM cards that were possibly European SIM cards that are carried through a provider in the United States but does not provide real-time information about tower connections.
To be clear, she's not the Attorney General. She's the attorney for the District of Massachusetts. But regardless, what stood out to me is that earlier in this week, you heard law enforcement obviously has been working this case hard, and you heard this synopsis there. They were very quick, law enforcement across the board, to say there was no connection between MIT and Brown. We reported it. We said there was no connection, according to what authorities say. And now they're obviously backtracking because they see a connection. Why do you think, Joe, as somebody who has run a campus police system, why do you think they were so quick to come out and say, nope, nothing to see here?
These incidents unfold quickly. I can't speak to it. I wasn't involved in that, but I will say that the information can be very disconnected and not fluid. In that particular case, it's really unclear. They may not have believed that they were connected at that time, but clearly once the evidence came to them and the reports came to them, they were able to make that happen.
It seems odd that they would even come out and say something as definitive. Just say, we don't know. Like, we're working that, we're trying to figure it out. Quickly, Jeff, before we let you go, as parents prepare to send their kids back January 5th or whatever, going into the new year, will this attack change the expectation of security on campus throughout the country, do you think?
Well, at a minimum, it has to change the culture. The culture starts at the top. The president at this University of Brown is going to have to make a statement before the college kids come back from winter break, that this is what we're doing moving forward, because the status quo, as we've learned from some parents, at $92,000 a student to attend Brown, they're not going to send their student to a university that they don't feel safe in.
It's such a great point. And I remember when I was in school, I went to one of these bucolic Ivy League schools where you could walk in any building anytime you wanted. There was no security. That was 25 years ago. That was a much different world. Things need to change now.
They do.
Joe and Jeff, thank you so much for your insight. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
A Fox News alert now. If you are just waking up this morning, the man believed to have murdered students at Brown University and a professor at MIT has been found dead inside a storage facility in New Hampshire. But there are still plenty of unanswered questions.
We're still investigating the motive in this case and trying to, because, like I said, he was very careful in his communications, and we just don't have any information right now to answer that question. But when we get that information, we will share it.
Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Scott Duffy joins me now. Scott, right now, how are investigators piecing together a motive? Specifically, why this suspect killed two teenage students that weren't even born when this guy reportedly attended Brown University, the same university where this shooting took place and where those two individuals died?
Yeah, good morning, Todd. Yeah, same questions as myself and the rest of us watching, but most importantly, investigators are already digging deep. So you have an individual that, from all reports, right, has been at the university 20 to 25 years ago, and then all of a sudden surfaces without us knowing what has brought him back to the university, the connection to the MIT professor, other than both being Portuguese. What is their connections in the past, perhaps being classmates, etc. But what took place in these last 20 some odd years that has brought this person back to Brown University and ultimately on the footsteps of this MIT professor's residence, and to have done unspeakable harm. So investigators are definitely digging deep to see what was that trigger, what took place that caused him to come here and do unspeakable acts.
You saw on the full screen that we just showed, he lived in Miami, Florida, prior to all this. He also planned this pretty extensively, from the storage unit up in New Hampshire to that rental car with Florida plates that he covered up then with Maine plates. That level of preparation, albeit not perfect because obviously they found him, but that level of preparation, what does it tell you about his state of mind?
Yeah. Regardless of what was going through his mind, perhaps some sort of mental health component, but he knew exactly what he was doing. The fact that we are seeing pieces of evidence that are going back months in planning, all this takes a lot to be able to have these communications where he is perhaps changing SIM cards, using different apps, to throw off authorities. So he was already thinking ahead of, I'm going to try to stay one step ahead of authorities and do what I do. I'm not quite sure if he was done. It just seemed like this was over a period of 6 days, finding him, with Saturday, going to Brown University, and then just a few days later to the MIT professor, and then being able to continue to escape authorities and wind up where he was found in a storage unit in New Hampshire.
Interesting point there. You don't think he was done, but yet he killed himself, apparently, when authorities started moving in. Just quickly, how do you square that circle, Scott?
Yeah, so it's a tremendous amount of planning. And so the Brown University, even though he had gone there, what was his target? Who was his target, as opposed to just going to that very campus, that very building that he was at? And then what happened with him and this MIT professor, whether it be years ago or did something recently take place that caused him to want to commit these acts? So I believe something was going through his mind, perhaps over the years, but typically you can only go back 3 to 6 months and you should be able to find what was that trigger that started him on this path. It just seemed that this was an anomaly, an exception to your typical active shooter going into a location to do the most harm in the shortest period of time. And then ultimately, they are typically met either with law enforcement being able to stop that threat, or somebody taking their own life. Yes, he took his own life, but it was some point afterwards.
The manhunt is over. The quest for answers just beginning. Scott Duffy, thank you, sir.
And to the Brian Yennis is live from Brown University's campus with more. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. Well, as Nate was just saying, police credit an anonymous tipster who called into the tip line on Tuesday saying, frankly, that he had seen the shooter in the area just a couple hours before the shooting. That tipster also wrote on Reddit a description of a vehicle, a gray Nissan with Florida plates just a couple blocks away from the engineering and physics building here on Brown University. Well, that anonymous tipster happens to also be the same man police released images of and were asking the public to help identify because of how close he was seen walking by the shooter in surveillance video. His name is John, a homeless man and former Brown University student who 2 hours before the shooting locked eyes with the gunman in the bathroom in the basement area across from the classroom where the shooting took place. John said he was suspicious of Claudio Neves Valente and followed him out of the building into the neighborhood where the two played a game of cat and mouse. This surveillance video shows the gunman running away from John, who was following him. John saw the gunman unlock his car, notice him, relock his car, and walk away. John confronts the shooter and says, "Your car is back there. Why are you circling the block?" The suspect responds, "Why are you harassing me?" Now, based on this tip, investigators say they reviewed surveillance footage and found a car matching that same description. Police then used flock cameras, license plate readers to identify the car. Neves Valente said they said that he put a Maine license plate over his Florida license plate, which made it a little bit difficult, but eventually police traced that car to an Alamo car rental company in Boston. They matched the images, they traced the name, and that's where they were able to trace this Neves Valente, to a storage unit under his name in Salem. Now, yesterday, I pressed police as to why a citizen is the person who noticed and grew suspicious of Neves Valente when this person was here for at least a couple of weeks and walking around. Listen.
Why did it take a citizen to notice a suspicious person right next to Brown University and not the police? And also, how long was the vehicle parked where it was? And was it days, hours, minutes?
It appeared to be days as far as the evidence. Why would a civilian observe that to be suspicious? It's a great point. And I like the fact that you're mentioning that and bringing that up. That's what we should all be doing, right? And it's just personality. Some people are more interested in finding out what others are doing. In this particular case, this person decided that he wanted to, and I'm glad he did.
Investigators describe John as an extremely articulate witness. John does happen to be a homeless man who was, we're told by a source, living in the basement area of the Barris Holly Engineering and Physics building, which of course opens up a whole new set of questions about the security of that building and why that was happening. But right now, John is the hero, and the AG says he deserves every bit of that $50,000 reward. Guys?
Yeah, clearly, I mean, Brian, he had the wherewithal and the information that led police directly to the suspect, and they praised him as they should. But you raised the question, why was a homeless man allowed to live in the basement of this college facility where this shooting eventually took place?
Yeah, it really brings up a lot of questions about the lack of security in that building. And the Brown University president, Christina Paxson, was pushed last night hard about this. We know in the affidavit that there are only 2 cameras outside of this building, and there was no security guard at this building, which was not atypical. So this building was never guarded. There weren't enough cameras. So obviously, it was so unguarded that they allowed somebody to live a homeless man to live in the building, an academic building. So again, John's a hero, but that brings up questions about security.
Right. He is a hero in this case, but Brian, they also have to grapple with something else. The shooting takes place that Saturday. Sunday, they arrest and then cut loose this person of interest. Initially, they told us that there was no connection between the shooting and that happened on that Monday, but now that we know that there is a connection, they gave him some time because they stopped the search, right?
You know, they'll push back and say ultimately that was 24 hours and they were still looking at every single lead. But I will tell you this, the timeline that also is something that we got to really drill in on here is that a custodian in the Brown University Engineering and Physics building noticed Claudio Neves Valente on November 28th. That's 2 weeks before the shooting. So again, if a custodian thought that this person looked suspicious 2 weeks before, this person is walking around campus in and out of a building, where was Brown University police? Where was the anybody patrolling that would have said, you know what, let me ask this guy some questions? And that's really, you know, where the timeline, where a lot of questions are, Lawrence.
Yeah. So the other thing, do you think this homeless guy is eligible for the $50,000?
According to the Attorney General, he thinks that he should get every dollar of it. I think I don't see why. I think it would be very hard pressed because without John, I don't think we're here today. I mean, he's the one that described the vehicle. Without the vehicle, they don't know who this is, and they don't find the connection to MIT. At least not yesterday.
Wow, and we know he went to school with this guy in Portugal, and we know that he was probably spent a lot of time in that building in 2000 to 2001, that 1 year he spent at Brown. So those are indeed the connections. We'll probably find out his life fell apart in Miami.
All right, Brian, thanks so much for joining the program. So the other thing they have to grapple with is that his visa overstay. I mean, we got to monitor this. We can't just have it. Most of the people that are in the country illegally right now are because of visa overstay. So if someone would have been proactive, followed up on this visa overstay, then this could have prevented. Of course, you got the cameras also as a part of that. Of course, you got the eyewitness accounts that they should have reacted more swiftly on that, but just a massive failure.
And you know, and yesterday, Lawrence, what you're referring to is that we learned that this suspect entered the U.S. through what's called the Diversity Lottery Immigrant Visa Program in 2017 and was granted a green card as a result. And yesterday, Kristi Noem says that that program has officially been suspended. She posted this on X in part. In 2017, President Trump fought to end this program following the devastating New York City truck ramming by an ISIS terrorist who entered under the DV-1 program and murdered 8 people. At President Trump's direction, I am immediately directing USCIS to pause the DV-1 program to ensure no more Americans are harmed by this disastrous program. And this is a program, it's a lottery where about 50,000 immigrants from various countries around the world are selected via computer system to come into this country. I actually know somebody from Nepal who came in this way, and he says that he was shocked when this happened to him, and he didn't even know exactly how his name was entered into this computer system. I mean, it changed his life as a result, and he's doing great work here now. But the president has always said merit-based is better. This is a diversity system, so he wanted to change it in 2017, and now it's suspended today.
Yeah, in September 14th, they said he went from a diversity immigrant visa, and then they said he was lawfully admitted as a legal permanent resident at JFK Airport back in 2017. He ends up in Miami, and sadly, this professor, same age, same time, former classmates, that family probably knows about him. But they had the professor that was killed, who evidently is a genius, was killed with his family, with his kids upstairs. So he gets assassinated. And Lawrence, to your point, I know investigations aren't easy, but did they put their foot off the gas?
They did. I mean, it's not even debatable.
Right. So they put the foot off the gas, and then they told everyone, "Don't worry about it. You're not in danger." Clearly, these people were in danger.
Right.
You had a crazed gunman out there, and then the next thing you know, the professor's dead on Monday. If they're able to pivot a different direction, a more accurate direction, if they're able to get to the building quicker before the shooting stopped, or close to when the shooting stopped and not 10, 20 minutes, maybe that professor's alive today.
They stopped the manhunt. That's the bottom line, and they're going to have to deal with that in the coming days. So a Fox News alert, the suspect in the Brown University shooting is dead. Attorney General Pam Bondi praising federal law enforcement and local authorities who found the alleged gunman in a New Hampshire storage unit dead by a self-inflicted gunshot wound and identified him as a Portuguese national. Officials also accusing him of killing an MIT professor and say he and the victim attended the same university in Lipson. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blunt joins us now. Deputy Attorney General, thanks so much for giving us some time this morning. Do you know, and I know this is early on in an investigation, any potential motive for such a gruesome crime?
Good morning. We don't know. We don't know yet. That's something that everybody's going to be now focused on over the coming days. From the moment this happened, first in Rhode Island and then in Massachusetts, the federal law enforcement worked closely with state law enforcement. The Attorney General and I were on the phone with the leadership yesterday, and everybody has been focused completely on finding this killer. And so now that that's happened, we'll now continue to focus on understanding what happened. I want to just say, echo what the Attorney General said, which is that while completely tragic and while our hearts go out to the victims and their families, this was a all-out effort by the FBI, by ATF, working with our state and local partners 24 hours a day since this happened. And what you see and what you saw yesterday is a result of those efforts. And so I appreciate the work that everybody's done to catch that killer, and I expect that we'll learn more in the coming days. But the answer is right now, there's a lot we don't know and that we have to find out.
Is there any plans for the administration to review the university's safety protocols? We're learning more information that the suspect 2 weeks before the crime was casing the location. You have homeless people that were living in the building. Obviously, this one ended up being a hero. But it is concerning that the cameras aren't working, people living within inside of the building, and they weren't able to detect someone casing the scene.
Yes, that's something that everybody's concerned about. Certainly the Attorney General, the FBI, we're concerned about that. But so is the university, and so is the state and the local law enforcement, because that is what we rely on to catch bad actors is not only witnesses but also cameras and surveillance. And so the fact that there was some failures here, some potential failures is something that everybody's focused on, and everybody should be focused on, and I expect we'll hear more about that in the coming days as well.
Meanwhile, today marks the deadline for the DOJ to make the Epstein files public after the president signed a law requiring those to be released. So in these files, are we going to learn any new information about Epstein and people that may have been associated with him?
So yes, so today is the 30 days, and I expect that we're going to release several 100,000 documents today, and those documents will come in all different forms, photographs and other materials associated with all of the investigations into Mr. Epstein. And just so everybody appreciates, President Trump has said for years that he wants full transparency, and he wants the Department of Justice to release everything that we can with respect to this investigation and cases. And we saw during the Biden administration radio silence from the very Democrats that are screaming from congressional steps today that we haven't done enough. But guess what? President Trump signed that law 30 days ago, and we have been working tirelessly since that day to make sure that we get every single document that we have within the Department of Justice, review it, and get it to the American public. Now, the most important thing that the Attorney General has talked about, that Director Patel has talked about, is that we protect victims. And so what we're doing is we are looking at every single piece of paper that we are going to produce, making sure that every victim, their name, their identity, their story, to the extent it needs to be protected, is completely protected. And so I expect that we're going to release more documents over the next couple of weeks. So today, several 100,000, and then over the next couple of weeks, I expect several 100,000 more. There's a lot of eyes looking at these, and we want to make sure that when we do produce the materials we're producing, that we're protecting every single victim. A judge in New York has required the U.S. Attorney in New York to also look at the materials to make sure that victims' information is protected.
So,
the judge in Sorry,
I only got 10 seconds left, Todd. But real quickly, since you guys are releasing these files, we shouldn't expect any charges to come out, any more charges, right?
Well, look, as the president directed, it's still being investigated, and I expect that will continue to happen. So we, as of today, there's no new charges coming, but we are investigating.
All right. Todd Blanche, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thank you.
We begin with a Fox News alert. The suspect in the Brown University killings has been found dead inside a storage facility in New Hampshire with a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
He killed himself inside the storage unit, and the firearms were found at his in the area of his thigh and in the area of his feet. We are 100% confident that this is our target. And that this case is closed from a perspective of pursuing people involved.
Authorities say he is Portuguese. He's a Portuguese national, went to Brown University for a year in the PhD program in the early 2000s, never graduated. Before that, he went to school in Lisbon, and his classmate was an MIT professor who authorities say the suspect also murdered at his home in the Boston suburbs, just days after the Brown University shooting.
The suspect's car was towed away from this storage facility last night, and authorities say they found evidence related to 2 shootings inside the vehicle. So that's major.
Let's bring in Fox News contributor Paul Morrow, who ran counterterrorism operations for the NYPD. He is, of course, live in Providence, Rhode Island with Reaction. Paul, we learned a whole lot yesterday as all of this came to a head. What do you make of everything that we learned, your reactions to these developments?
So I think one of the things that we can sort of set upon here with some confidence is that the motive is going to be a lot less specific than a lot of the speculation had it. The commonality between the 2 crime events seems to be tenuous at best. We may never know, and you know, unfortunately in police work you don't always get a nice, neat resolution, but it looks to me like where we're going to end up is some general gripe against the school, somebody leading a slipping down life, and then there's this professor at MIT who seems to have been everything that this guy perhaps wanted to be and never quite became. They overlapped in school, as Brian said. They were of similar age. In the MIT case, the professor was married. He seemed to have everything going for him, whereas the perp in this instance seemed to have a lot less. So it looks to me like somebody who was just bitter, lashing out. And it tracks to what we talked about earlier in the week with the possibility that the classroom was just chosen at random. It was the first one he encountered when he went through that unguarded and unsecure outside door that was propped open or had no key card access during this study hall and other events.
Paul, did it surprise you that we learned 2 things? First of all, a homeless man is the one who gave the tip to the cops to close this case, but he was standing in the building, which talks about the security protocols, even though he's a hero in this event. Also, the suspect cased the university 2 weeks before he committed the ultimate crime.
Yeah, you know, there were echoes of Mangione in this thing because this guy was nowhere near as clever as he thought he was. You know, he graduated or he went to Brown, excuse me, he didn't graduate. But, you know, he thought of himself, I'm sure, as some engineering genius, and so he did this methodical thing where he cased the place and all this other stuff. Well, not only was that how they also picked him up on video when they went out to the residential area, but that's where he encountered somebody who ultimately was his downfall. So he goes in, he's casing around in the place, and, you know, Lawrence, it's an interesting thing. I'm actually not that surprised that it was a homeless person that stepped up. I'm going to tell you why. Homeless people know everything that's going on in the vicinity of where they've decided to squat. Even if it's a cardboard box outside. You know, when I was on foot patrol, if you buy a homeless guy a Snapple, he'll tell you everything that's going on in your patrol block in 10 minutes. He knows everything. So this guy, he did the thing that homeless people very often do. They're actually proprietary about, you know, as the saying goes, be it ever so humble, right? And so that's why he says, you know, this guy doesn't belong here. Nobody knows that building like this guy that was living downstairs next to the boiler or something. Shows you how bad the security protocols were. But it does show you just a sort of human dynamic here that he felt something was off. He followed this guy. He scared the guy. The guy ran. But then he came forward, as we know now, and he's the one who allowed the police to button the whole thing up.
I'm still trying to find out, did he rent that storage facility ahead of time? Did he plan on keeping things there? Was it a murder-suicide? Likely by his, we never know, but was that the plan all along, go to a storage facility and kill yourself?
You know, I would say no, and I'm not basing that on anything more than you guys know, but just the psychology, you know, this is similar to a whole bunch of terrorism cases I had and things like that. You know, he did all of this planning. And maybe it wasn't high-level planning, it wasn't nation-state level planning here, but he did do the recon, he walked the building, he did all of this stuff, he had the plates ready to go, he had the storage location rented ahead of time, is how the whole thing went. And so I think he thought that he had outsmarted everybody and that he was going to be able to toy with Brown specifically, with MIT, and probably with society in America at large. I think he had elevated himself to that position. He probably was monitoring a lot of the reporting and getting a kick out of it, but I think he also realized they're closing in on me, and when it was clear to him he wasn't going to get away, he did what he did. What else is in there, I don't know. I haven't heard they've recovered a manifesto or anything like that. So as I said, we may never really get a good answer as to what his motivations here were.
Paul, how long does it usually take a coroner to determine when somebody died? And then by that determination, we'll learn when he shot himself, if he even knew that police were hot on his heels.
An experienced coroner will know now. Not my area of expertise, but he's got a pretty good idea now. They can tell from the lividity in the body, where the body was lying, how much blood pooled, without being too graphic here. They can look at the eyes. There are these petechiae, they call. They could see the broken blood vessels. They can tell a lot just from looking. And, every cop has this story. The ME, the medical examiner, shows up at the scene and has to pronounce. And that very often is who makes the determination as to, in a lot of towns around the country, sometimes without even being a doctor, whether or not it is suspicious or not. There's a lot of slippage there. But I can guarantee you that's not going to happen in this case. By now, they have a pretty good idea of when he did it. They know how he did it, obviously. And I think that one of the things they're going to be looking at here, aside from in the digital world, to see if he's in contact with other people, et cetera, but they're going to be looking at ballistics here. And here's why I go to that. I don't see how, if he used the same gun in both instances, they didn't connect the ballistics from MIT to Brown instantaneously. Now, the task force was competent. I don't care what anybody says. Once they got rolling after that false lead by Monday, they were moving good. So they would have done that. So either he used one gun in one place and one in the other, or he had other guns we don't know about. I would be curious to see how the ballistics come back. But at the end of the day, what I'm getting, and I don't mean to be too graphic, I'm getting a bitter loner loser. Slipping down life. We used to call it in the terrorism world, loser to lion, because he wanted to make his mark in the world. He wanted to be somebody. ISIS knows how to play on that. I'm not suggesting he was in touch with ISIS, but that's the same phenomenon. And I think that he just came up here to lash out at something he felt failed him.
Yeah. So, Paul, I was going back and forth with some buddies that's still on the job, and they had the theory that this guy was going to continue, but he felt the cops closing in. Have you heard anything from your sources about that?
No, I haven't heard anything that would be indicia of him continuing, but I don't think that is at all an outlandish supposition. In light of the fact that, as I said, he did all of this planning. He had at least 2 guns. He moved up here. Remember, he was in Miami. He moves up here to New England in the winter. It's kind of a reverse migration, right? And he does all of this stuff. He gets the apartment. He gets the storage location. He's got the 2 guns, which they're going to look at where and how he got them. He does the casing at a location for upwards of 2 weeks, according to what we're hearing. He went in and out of the building. All of this stuff tells me that he wanted to get away with it. This was not a suicide mission, let's be clear. And so as a result, you have to say to yourself, he thought he was going to sail off into the sunset, snicker about it, and then potentially, do it again. And so I hope that one of the things we get out of this is that the universities, many of which were very on board with defunding, we've seen university takeovers and campus protests where the police are not exactly popular. I hope they take it upon themselves to look at the protocols no matter where they are. We have active shooter training these days in high schools and grammar schools because of school shootings. The faculty and the students in these Ivy League schools, they're not immune to this no matter how much they think they are. And so if there's anything that comes out of this that's good, they got to do a hot wash here and say to themselves, are we in the same position? Because this was just a target waiting to happen.
Yeah, and lastly, I would flood Miami. If you want the facts, that's where he was. Do you think the investigators are there now, being that he's dead and this has been solved? How aggressive will they be in trying to reestablish motive, or to establish motive by maybe going back to find out where he lived before he came there in November?
They were there once they had him ID'd. They were there probably all week. I was hearing the name, but we couldn't go with it, Brian, because it was unconfirmed. And as you know, Fox is going to go with stuff that we can confirm and corroborate. So I was hearing that name, a couple of days ago, maybe a day and a half ago. So these days all blended together. But if I knew it, obviously they knew it. They had been down there, I can guarantee you. The FBI Miami office, Miami PD, they were scraping this thing, soup to nuts to try to figure out what is this guy about. I'm sure they did an entry into his location. They were on his cyber stuff. We know they were trying to get onto his phone. But again, it shows the planning. He did this thing with the Google phone and the European SIM card. So, he had that much capability. So very clearly, they are all over this. They are looking for a motive because the people who do this kind of thing, particularly at the federal level here because it's cross-country, they're going to be looking for commonalities and how to prevent the next one, which is the hardest thing in police work, to prevent something that hasn't happened yet.
Hard to target. Paul, thanks so much. Great work last night and now and throughout the day.
Josh School is a former FBI intelligence executive. Great to have you here with us. I mean, we're trying to piece all of this together, but we're not investigators or former FBI agents. So you tell us, what are the questions you have at this point to try to pull all this together?
Well, I think the first question you have to ask is, what was the motive? What was the motive to conduct an attack at Brown? And then what was the grievance he had against his former classmate and the professor at MIT? So I think those are real questions that investigators are trying to piece together. And this is now a global investigation. You have not just the New England area, but you also have what's going on in Portugal and then any other family, friends, associates around the U.S. that they are looking to get in front of.
Okay, a couple things here. Here's the university president. Let's go ahead and listen to this. Late last night, went on for, nearly 2 hours as we were watching it. Give it a listen.
We're going to have to look back and say, we don't know how this person got in. We don't know when they came in. We do know that the building was unlocked that day for exams, and that's something we're going to have to look into. We'll look at everything that is done, but I do not think a lack of cameras in that building it had anything to do with what happened there.
So a couple things. You mentioned motive. I imagine they must have a hunch at a minimum. This homeless man living in the basement of the building where the murders were carried out, and apparently they had an interaction on the sidewalk. Maybe that's what led him there. We do not know. Are you impressed with the investigation as you watched it this week, or not?
So I think it's tough to judge that, to be honest with you, Bill. I mean, they had a lack of information. This person was clearly trying to evade law enforcement. The lack of security cameras in that building is a problem, and the lack of security cameras on that street are a problem. I think what we really have to focus on here is the importance of the relationship between the law enforcement and the public. Had it not been for this tipster, the law enforcement is still looking for him, and likely he is going out of the country, as reporting has had him had a plane ticket for Thursday night. So I think that's what needs to focus on, is the relationship between the public and law enforcement and how important tips are.
Interesting about the ticket, to leave. I wonder, I guess this is something you probably can't answer. It's just another question, which is, what made him decide not to try to leave the country? Did he know they were on the trail? But the other thing is, with the university president and security, we have somebody who is regarded as a hero in helping. This is a man who was homeless, who was sleeping in the basement of the building where the first shooting took place, Josh.
Well, I think, first of all, great for that person coming forward. Otherwise, this is still going on. Secondly, you really have to question, how is he getting into the building? What was the security procedures? Where are they going to look at all of that on Brown and other campuses to make sure the students are safe? These things happen, and they require a review to make sure that the students are safe. And there was clearly a lack of security and lack of cameras.
Yeah, here's the FBI from last night yet again. Back to Providence we go. Watch here.
Even though the suspect was found dead tonight, our work is not done. There are many questions that need to be answered. There's a lot of evidence that needs to be processed, and most importantly, the victims and their families deserve special care and consideration. The FBI and our partners across Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire will continue to search for answers for the victims, survivors, and their families.
So the other deceased is that professor from MIT who was killed 2 days later. And we have to factor this into the investigation as well. They went to school together in Portugal. Tie that thread.
I would love to, Bill. I think all of this is really a mystery right now. What was his grievance with Brown? He went there 20 plus years ago. What triggered his grievance with the MIT professor longer than that time in the mid-90s? And then what caused him to act right now? What pushed him over the top to go and conduct these heinous acts right now? Clearly had problems. Clearly mental health is likely a factor. But what caused him to act today, this week?
We don't know. I mean, you throw your hands up and you listen to all this stuff, and you trace it after 3 different states here. Josh, thanks for coming on, and we'll continue to work through it, because I know you will as well. So thanks for helping us through so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Retired NYPD Inspector Paul Morrow and correspondent CB Cotton have been all over this story on the ground in Providence, working their sources there. And we begin with the very latest that we are now learning in this case this afternoon with CB Cotton. Hi, CB.
Hey, Martha. Well, Brown University parents are now going to have a lot of questions about the timeline shared by investigators that now shows the suspect, Claudio Neves Valente, was able to get inside a campus building 2 weeks before the shooting. Providence police say Neves Valente cased the nearby neighborhood hours before the shooting and was also spotted by witnesses inside Brown's engineering building as early as November 28th. Investigators say as leads came in, they were able to confirm his identity to car rental records in Massachusetts that showed the suspect rented a Nissan sedan with Florida plates that was spotted at the scene of the Brown shooting and at the murder of MIT professor Nuno Loureiro, who was killed inside his home in a Boston suburb Monday night. But investigators say the suspect changed plates between the 2 crimes, making it harder to track him down. Still, they had his name and discovered he had rented a storage unit in New Hampshire, where video showed the suspect entering the facility but never leaving. And last night, he was found there dead. Investigators call it good old-fashioned police work, but they're also thanking that homeless man named John, who wrote an online tip after spotting the suspect and the suspect's car on campus hours before the shooting. And Martha, some investigators now believe that reward money should go to John. Back to you.
What a story. CB, thank you very much. Let's bring in Paul Morrow, retired NYPD inspector, attorney, Fox News contributor, and he joins us again live from Providence, Rhode Island. Paul, great to have you with us. I want to start by playing this because Christina Paxson, the president of Brown University, has had a number of appearances at these news conferences that have raised a lot of questions, frankly, about her leadership at Brown. This is from last night. Watch this.
I think we're going to have to look back and say, we don't know how this person got in. We don't know when they came in. We do know that the building was unlocked that day for exams, and that's something we're going to have to look into. But I do not think a lack of cameras in that building it had anything to do with what happened there.
Lack of cameras had nothing to do with what happened there, and, of course, what happened subsequently. Paul, your reaction to that?
Well, that is certainly a benevolent and likely self-serving assessment of what went on here. Let's recognize that this was a building that is at the perimeter of the Brown campus. It abuts a residential area. So if you're coming out of that residential area, this is the first building you're going to get to. The building was also that day very active with not only that study hall, but exams going on. And yet, despite all of those factors, and despite the fact that there's been some crime up here. If you look at the Cleary reports, Martha, which are reports that capture the crime at any particular college, the colleges have to write them and submit them and put them online by federal legislation. The Brown campus saw 20 rapes in 2023, 20 rapes in 2023 and 10 in 2024. That's a total of 30. And yet, this building was completely unsecure, no cameras, no key card access, and on a day when the building was hopping, no security guard. You got to really ask yourself how it is that we could say video wouldn't help here when, of course, everybody was trying to ascertain who this guy was and what he looked like coming in. And the fact that he had cased the location, and yet nobody picked that up. He was there for 2 weeks, apparently in the area, going in and out that day, which is when he encountered the homeless guy. To say that video would have played no part in this, I think, is frankly a gaslight.
You know, it raises another question for me, Paul, and tell me what you think of this. But, you know, these are both obviously smart individuals. They both studied at Brown University. And both of them, it appears, may have figured out that this is the one place on campus where you can sleep in the basement and there's no camera that's detecting you coming and going, and you can walk into the building, case it, look at everything, figure out where there are and aren't cameras, and come back a couple of weeks later and do a mass shooting.
And it doesn't have to be, Martha, that we're talking about the level even of a mass shooting. I mean, we have active shooter drills going on in high schools and in grammar schools all across the country because, of course, we've all seen them and we know that's part of the culture these days, unfortunately. But these Ivy League universities and institutions of higher education seem to somehow believe that they're immune from it. But even taking that off the table, what about things like burglaries, people coming in to harass others, and, of course, homeless people, which at this point is inarguable because the hero of the case, the guy that broke it, turns out to have been living next to the boiler in the basement.
Yeah, which they would have picked up on if they'd had cameras. They would have seen people coming in and out of that building and said, who's that guy? Because you know, even though he turns out to be a hero in this case, I don't think that they anticipate that they have people that they don't know about living in the basement. It's a bizarre set of circumstances, but thankfully this case has come to some conclusions and these families are devastated, obviously, and they have lost their a husband and a father and 2 young people. Paul, thank you very much. We'll check back with you later.
The hunt is finally over after 6 agonizing days and numerous screw-ups. The suspected Brown University gunman found dead on a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His body was located in a storage unit in Salem, New Hampshire. The suspect is a former Brown student and Portuguese national. Police also believe he's responsible for the cold-blooded murder of an MIT professor found dead in his home Monday in Massachusetts. Officials in Providence patting themselves on the back.
We got him. It was because of the information provided to us by neighbors and the tireless work of our Providence Police Department, the Rhode Island State Police, the FBI, the ATF, and many other federal partners. We all worked well together to be able to identify this suspect.
I'll tell you that I'm extremely proud of this department.
The teams worked really hard.
Yeah, those officials crediting a Reddit post from a homeless man, the second person that they were looking for, with cracking the case wide open.
I'm hearing from sources that the person that identified the shooter happened to be a homeless person that either lived around or inside that Barris and Holly building.
He was as outstanding a witness as I've seen, and he deserves a lot of credit.
It looks like he posted on Reddit on Monday.
We received a tip about that post and immediately acted on it.
We knew about what was on Reddit, but we didn't know who that person was. That's why when we identified another person, we didn't know when that person came forward that he was the Reddit poster. And he blew this case right open. He blew it open.
Yeah, it might be they just got lucky because their security protocols, not so much. We're now learning that there were only 2 surveillance cameras on the outside of the building where the shooting took place. And the university's president, well, she says the doors were unlocked.
I think we're going to have to look back and say, you know, we don't know how this person got in. We don't know when they came in. We do know that the building was unlocked that day for exams, and that's something we're going to have to look into. We'll look at everything that is done, but I do not think a lack of cameras in that building it had anything to do with what happened there.
Jessica, I think we can all be, breathe a sigh of relief that this person was found. I hate that he was found dead because you want to be able to question someone like this and you want to see him face justice. It's the coward's way out to do that. But there's still more questions than answers on this whole thing. I mean, I don't think you have to be conservative or liberal to say Brown University doesn't look like a safe place to be right now.
No, it was really interesting to me in the couple of days right after how they kept saying that it wasn't unsafe for the students to remain there, even though the guy was at large. Like, I would have been the first mom in the pickup line.
Yeah.
That was like, get in. get in right now. And I might have brought security with me to get my kid from the dorm into the car. That no more security cameras could have helped. I tend to think more cameras are better. Maybe you would have had a different angle on something. This is not how anyone expected this to end, though, that this story about a Portuguese national who knew the MIT professor when he was in school back in Portugal, went to Brown as well. There's like a physics revenge axe to grind is a very strange line in all of this. But I just wanted to say something about the conspiracy theories that existed online during all of this, which, I mean, blowing my mind. Like, the killer didn't shout Allah Akbar, that was one. Killer didn't target Ella Cook, the Republican who was murdered. Killer didn't target that class because of a Jewish professor. The killer wasn't trans. The killer wasn't that Muslim Palestinian student who was doxxed that Brown had to take them off their website. And the MIT professor wasn't Jewish or hadn't made pro-Israel statements. We have to be very careful with the swirl that we put out online. Some very prominent accounts were tweeting things like this, and I understand it was upsetting. It felt like it was taking forever, and the police were not doing a good job communicating with us. But this kind of stuff is incredibly dangerous.
You know, I don't disagree with you to point that out.
Right.
I really don't. I get exactly where you're coming from. But Tyrus, you only fill a vacuum if a vacuum is left open. And everything she points out are tied to issues that we see other atrocities committed almost every day. Look no further than Australia and other things that have happened in this country. So people aren't going there to be hateful. They're going there because they're having to figure things out for themselves, because these officials either weren't letting anything out or they weren't doing a good job at positioning themselves and telling the public we're on this.
No, and Jessica brings up a really interesting point that kind of bothers me. We're so focused on the label of the story or the label of the person. We had to tell everybody that it was a homeless man. It used to just be an eyewitness. It was an eyewitness, a person who stepped forward. But you have to say homeless man, because that way, well, I guess he favors Democrats because they're in favor of homeless people. And if you don't have homeless people, we wouldn't have solved this murder. Like, they try to connect things that don't need to be connected. His name would have been fine. Maybe he didn't want to brag about being homeless. Maybe he was in between jobs. Maybe he was in between relationships. But this is what we do. We start putting the titles on everything. And they were so quick because of social media. You said, all the conspiracy theories. The funny thing is, when you don't look at it, they don't get out. I purposely did not look at one story on social media about this. And guess what? Not one person today stopped me in the hallway to talk about the conspiracy theory. So we need to leave a lot of this stuff and not retweet it, rebroadcast it, or bring it up. We need to start leaving it where it is and stop falling for the labels. Why do we have to call this person came forward, he saw something, he said something, he should be respected. If there's a reward, he should get it. But letting everyone know that he's down on his luck or he's homeless or whatever his situation is, I don't see how that helps anyone.
You know, Jesse, the one thing we did learn about the shooter is that he came over and he got legal residency here from this diversity visa lottery. 130,000 people were selected last year, apparently pretty much at random. So they're not sending their best and brightest, but we're not picking the best and brightest either by the hundreds of thousands. We've had other terrorists come over and get residency through that. The 2017 incident at Halloween where they drove, that dude drove a car through people here. So it's like, President Trump tried to halt it then, wasn't able to, or wasn't able to finish the deal on that. So now he's halting it again. I'm sure he'll be challenged, but, immigration definitely plays a role in this.
Can you believe we have a lottery system for immigration?
Yeah.
It's like we spin a roulette wheel for minorities. We're going to go with a guy in Portugal who got expelled from school. Come on in. Welcome to America. This is not how you build a football team, how you hire for a company, how you do anything. You don't close your eyes and throw a dart at the wall and hit a resume. That's not how you build it, and that's definitely not how you build the United States of America. Jessica brings up conspiracy theories. The police arrested the wrong guy. So that was a theory that was wrong. They arrested a white veteran, and it set the investigation back hours. People get things wrong. They have theories. Sometimes they pan out. Sometimes they don't. I don't think you should be blaming people online who are trying to find the killer. And a lot of this stuff that we're being yelled at, because the people were yelling at the public, stop, guess where they got the tip? online.
Reddit.
Someone wrote a thing on Reddit, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's a conspiracy."
But then they called the FBI line. They weren't tweeting like it's the Palestinian kid or it's a trans
Jessica,
person.
people are trying to solve the case.
Great.
It's okay if
Nancy
people help
Drews
out.
everywhere.
Okay, if you're going to get mad at someone online who's trying to find a killer, if they had actually caught the guy, maybe the MIT professor would still be alive.
True.
All right, relax over there. So this guy we know now is arrogant. I have a Portuguese guy on my staff. He translated some stuff. He was in the same class as this MIT professor in Portugal and got kicked out of school. No one liked him. So he comes here and goes to Brown, has a terrible experience at Brown, and then disappears for 25 years. We see addresses in Boston, Miami, and Vegas. And this guy at MIT was like on the cutting edge of nuclear fusion. So I think there's a jealousy factor here. He didn't like Brown, he didn't like this MIT professor, so he came out and did his duty. The homeless guy, okay? The reason you're calling him the homeless guy is because he's living at the building where the shooting was. So let me ask you a question. Does Brown University know there's a homeless guy living on campus, or do they not know? So if they know and they didn't tell the cops, that's a problem because he would have been an eyewitness. Or they don't know, that's even worse. That means they have absolutely no security. And thank God for this guy. Apparently, he's a genius. He went to Brown, didn't work out, he's having some problems, but he lives at the school, and the homeless guy provided better security than the $8 billion endowment and the entire campus security staff did. That says a lot.
I mean, Emily, that's kind of the problem. And I did some research last weekend, sitting on the show, because Big Weekend Show is a couple of hours long. And Brown University is the most surveilled college campus in the country when it comes to cameras per student. But this building is like this giant black hole of cameras. So the president gets up there, and what does she say? She goes, well, I don't think cameras were a problem because we ended up using cameras to find him. It's like, yeah, you use people's Ring doorbell and like a camera on like a parking ticket post. Like these aren't the cameras that you guys paid for and put in.
I mean, this entire situation would be so hilarious if 3 people hadn't paid for it with their lives, because it is so absolutely ludicrous, so patently absurd for people like Brown University president and for the mayor and just all of those tragic individuals up there that clearly don't have a modicum of competence or any type of strength whatsoever that said, you know what, we're going to meet this with the aggression it requires because 2 people are dead and then to find out and the 3rd one is linked. Instead, they had the most low energy, lackadaisical approach. It's totally, by the way, with honors. We are lucky that the person living in the basement was an upstanding, wonderful human being who wanted to help find out and seek out why there was a random on campus. But what if he had been a perp? Because there's a lot of people that live here in New York City, a lot of our friends that encounter homeless psychos in their lobby, and they don't have that same outcome. So you're telling me that the president says, well, it's because of finals the doors were unlocked. I remember in law school, I don't remember college, it was 100 years ago, but in law school during finals week, everything was closed down even more. Otherwise, normal attorneys, admitted to the bar, you could come in and use the library. Finals week, it was students only. You had to show your ID for every single door to get in. So you're telling me now, when our kids are at stake, that being in finals somehow means all bets are off? People are searching for some type of justification for homicide always. Why did they do this? Is this a Good Will Hunting gone bad? The 2 professors fight. There is zero justification for homicide anytime, which means that when our kids and our peers and loved ones are in the care of professionals, we need to be able to trust that they do see the value of cameras as deterrence and as identification and armed security guards for both those things, et cetera, because people are going to be crazy and do horrible things you can't predict. So you need to have a system and a structure in place that will allow you to feel safe dropping off your child, because now 2 families of children, of students, and that MIT professors' families, they are celebrating Christmas alone with an empty chair at the table.
Yeah, I hope this homeless guy's a great guy. I don't know anything about him. I know that Kai, the machete guy, was good until he wasn't. So we don't know much about him, and he shouldn't just be living on campus.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.